Hello, everyone. So glad you could join us today. Welcome to the AAISP webinar series, and it's great to have you. My name is Bob Perkins. I'm the founder and chairman of the AAISP, and we're going to have a really great conversation today. If we can go ahead and move to the next slide or two, that would be great. Thank you. You know, some of you may be aware of the AAISP, others on the webinar may not. We're a global inside sales association. We have a lot of resources. We're community-based. We have local chapters all around the world. So if you get a chance, if you could go out and take a look at the resources on the AAISP website, I think you'll find something that can help you in your inside sales or your digital sales journey. Today's a great topic. It has to do with, you know, things that sometimes we don't hear on a sales call. And a lot of times the prospect may say certain words and they just go over our head, or, you know, we're not really clued into some of the things that they're saying as much as we should be. Well, there's been quite a bit of research on this, and we're going to find out today things to look for, things to listen for when you're on a sales call, whether it's a prospecting call or maybe it's a call that you're hoping to close the actual deal. And we'll hear 5 very specific clues to listen for that can help indicate the health of the sale or where the deal stands. I'm really happy to have Amit Bendoff with us here today. Amit is the CEO of Gong. Amit, how are you? I think you're on mute there. If you want to unmute your microphone, that'd be great.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, you know, I've never done that. I've always. It's good to have you today. And, you know, we've worked with Gong for the last couple of years. We're a supporter of the association. They've done some pretty amazing research on actual real life sales calls that happen. And with that, Amit, I'll turn it over to you, and thanks for coming on today with us.
Hey, thanks, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here, and always happy to speak with the crowd here. It's you know, this is one of the few events that we've done. I'm happy to share some of the knowledge that we're doing. Obviously, you know, we started Gong to help shed the light on sales conversation. It's always considered kind of like an art. There are 10,000 books on what to say on sales calls, how to do it and how to handle, but our goal is actually to provide data, not just opinions and facts and theories, but actually to provide some data that can help salespeople say the right things, ask the right questions, and do all the things that are more based on data on their calls. So we're happy to share some of that with the community today. So a little bit of, you know, what we're going to show here. So we're going to show 5 things that are, you know, not always that obvious to all salespeople on all calls. And these are visual cues that something is off with your deal or your conversation. But before we start, I just want to share a little bit on how we got to that. And again, what's the methodology for the research? So this is research, not opinion, not something of personal experience of me or anyone else, but just on analysis of real call. So everything that we're going to see here today is based on data, okay? Not just anecdotes, not just a few calls, but a fairly large number of calls. Over 500,000 call recorded and analyzed using artificial intelligence. Okay, all calls are first recorded, then they're speaker separated to separate the things that the prospect is saying and the salesperson is saying. All calls are transcribed and transformed into text, and then this text is analyzed to actually what's going on in the call. Last but not least, we're looking at what is the outcome of the call. Did the deal close? Did the deal move forward? Did the deal start stalling, or was the deal lost? So all the deals, we're seeing the correlation between what's being said on the calls and then what's the outcome of the call. The outcomes could be anything from a meeting schedule, if that was the purpose, or deal closed, if that's an actual deal. So that's what we're going to share, and we're going to share 5. There's a lot more. If you have any other questions, by all means, feel free to chat or send us an email, and we post new research pieces from time to time. So without further ado, here's the first verbal cue that's not always that obvious. And this is when a prospect says, we or I need to figure out, okay? This is almost always a sign that there is something that troubles them that they don't know. This is as we need to figure out who gives the final go-ahead for this. You had a great call, the prospect is interested in the product or services, but yeah, you know, I need to figure out who is it. This is something that you definitely want to address, or we need to figure out how we'll use this product internally. Something is still murky and unclear. We've got to figure out how we're going to justify the ROI on this. And that the prospect is thinking about in the back of their minds, and you'd better address them, because we see when these words come up, the conversion rate starts to decrease unless you do something about it. So that was point number 1.
You know, Amit, I know I've used these words myself. I can remember recently getting a demo on something, saying, you know, I got to figure out if this is going to fit with our current platform. And I really wasn't that interested in it.
Absolutely. So figure out is, you can think about it as an immediate call to action. You'd better do something about it now or expect delays. So here's the next point. And again, that's not necessarily an obvious one or intuitive one. So that's the topic of when to discuss competition, early on or late in the game, and depending on who brings it up, the customer or the prospect. So let's look at the data, what the data is telling us. So we looked on the effect of mentioning competitors in a conversation, okay? And the x-axis is the number of mentions, from 0 mentions to 14 mentions. Or 16 and above. And the y-axis is the probability of moving to the next step with a deal. Not necessarily closing, but moving from one stage to a more advanced stage. The orange one is for early stage calls, and the late stage, the blue one is for late stage, more downstream calls, okay? What we're seeing, okay, that the more competitor mentions that there happen like late in the stage, the deal starts to be in jeopardy. The probability of closing starts to decline. Okay, so usually that'll be like negotiation, commercial stage, or more advanced stage. And actually earlier on in a deal, if you mention it early, that's actually pretty positive, because if you don't discuss the competition, it'll come later, and that you know, you've not positioned yourself, and your probability starts to go down. So what you want to pay attention for, competition that comes up often and late, is a pretty serious red flag for your deal.
Yet if it's mentioned kind of on that first call, let's say, not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to bring it up. I mean, they will find out sooner or later, and it's better to bring it up front, position yourself, understand if you're at an advantage. If not, maybe, you know, it's not, you don't want to invest too much time into the deals, but better to address these issues early on. Number 3 is prospects are a little too enthusiastic. And this one might be a little hard to determine what's to or what's not, but what we've found is something that's pretty interesting, and it's not obvious to all salespeople, especially some people that are fairly new to their company and tend to have happy ears. And here Gong actually ranks sentiment for every call. So every sentence is put on a scale from +2 to -2. +2 being extremely positive, and -2 is extremely negative. Okay, and every sentence is scored, and then there's an overall score for the entire conversation. Never mind the exact formula, but you can see that the lost deals actually have a slightly higher sentiment score. Okay, and although this provides a correlation, not necessarily an explanation, but prospects that are overly enthusiastic, if it sounds too good to be true, odds are that it probably is.
You know, I'm sitting here thinking we've all been on calls where we kind of have someone that says, wow, that looks great. I could see this doing that. And Amit, would you say that if somebody is overly enthusiastic, just like on the very first slide you said, you know, I need to figure out if this does that, those should almost be treated as an early objection that you need to drill down into. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, Bob. So, you know, I wouldn't take, you know, the corollary that someone is enthusiastic, you should disqualify them, right? But
right.
I mean, you should definitely open, like, you know, dig deeper and understand exactly. And the next point actually complementary of that. But yeah, you should, a customer is overly cautious, overly enthusiastic. So it's probably something that you want to understand better and dig deeper.
Yep.
Sorry. Okay, so here's the next one that you should know, that the sentiment level of sales opportunities actually goes down as the deal progresses. Okay, this is actually natural. Okay, because customer usually shift from value. Okay, why would I want this? And then they start to think about risk. Why would I not want this? What could go wrong? Okay, and this is actually a pretty positive signal. But if that continues to be positive all along, then probably there's a huge red flag over this deal. Number 4 is objections. Objections are actually natural, good, and need to be anticipated. Okay, so we found that actually the negative sentiment actually increases. Remember our previous point?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's natural. If that does not happen, okay, then you may not have a deal, or something there is off. Okay. People will want to know about your reference, about your security, about your legal terms, about terms. They're going to ask questions that are going to drive you nuts. Okay, that's actually a good thing. Okay, it means that they're seriously considering.
Wow. So it's almost like if they're not saying anything at these, that's not a good sign, because it means maybe they're not engaged and they're not curious about some of these, you know, these items that they bring up.
Yeah, well, they could be engaged, but they're not seriously considering the buying, because they're not fully thinking it out. How is this going to work? What are the, you know, the pros and cons? And
Right.
and then there should be a natural shift from value to risk as you progress. People start to think about all the things that could go wrong before they actually make the commitment. That's actually a very positive sign to
Right.
the trained ear.
You're kind of double checking to make sure this is really going to be the solution. Amit, we did have a question come in on the previous slide there. The question is, do you have any insight into why the deal was lost for higher sentiment scores? In other words, sometimes in the CRM we capture what was the reason it was lost or stalled. Was it price? Was it, you know, not a good technical fit? Do you have any downstream reasons why those lost deals with the high sentiment were actually lost? I'm not sure if you capture that or
Well, I think what we try to do is look at the data without necessarily explaining why. So this shows like very high correlation, but I think all the points combined here, this point and the previous two shows that overly high sentiment, not asking difficult questions, and not asking those questions as you progress down the deals means that the buyer isn't serious. Either they're just kicking tires, or they're looking to get a price quote for something that is competitive. They want to have like another horse in the race just for evaluation periods. I mean, these are all theories. I mean, we don't know why. Okay, and even if the customer telling you, well, we didn't buy because of price or budget, you never really know if that's true or not. I mean, right. They may not be telling you the truth or may not know the truth. That's what they're telling themselves. So that's hard to tell, what people are actually thinking. But we try to stick to the facts, and that's what they say. If you don't get those, if you don't see this shift from value to risk, asking difficult questions down the road, then the deal is probably too good to be true.
Well, I suppose another way to look at it, if they're overly enthusiastic, wow, this is great. I can't believe your application can really do this. I think this would be great for our reps. So if they give you that positive sentiment, but then they don't ask any of these difficult questions like, how long can you really implement this on our particular platform? Are you sure it's going to work? What you might think is kind of a difficult question and maybe even an objection. If you don't have some of those in there, you're saying it lowers the likelihood of it's a real deal.
Absolutely, and this actually confirms some of the things that I hear from veterans. They said, well, he asked good questions. Good questions are actually buying signal. They're asking about security, about pricing, about renewals, about all those things. Okay, that once they've passed the initial value, they start to go over their concerns until they have a complete buying vision of your product or service. The fifth point here is pricing, and pricing is a good question. So going back to the first point, if people don't ask you how much it costs, it means that they're probably not serious about your product. That question should come up, okay? But there's something very interesting that the data shows is how much and when is pricing discussed. And what we're seeing here is that pricing discussed a little bit. If you look at at a conversation here, at a timeline of a call, let's say they're all normalized on a 60-minute scale. So it comes up a little bit early on in the conversation, in closed deals, and more towards the end of the call. Okay, but if you look at the chart of the lost deals, people that are a little over-occupied with pricing early on in the call in the first 11 to 20 minutes are less likely to buy. So if price is one of the first concerns and questions, that's another audio clue that something is off with this buyer.
And this makes a lot of sense. And I if you're on the line watching this, think about your own. I think about my own buying habits, and if I'm very interested in something, it really doesn't matter initially too much to me, because I am really looking to solve a problem. And if solving that problem or getting me something I need is important, I'm really engaged early in the call. Yes, eventually price does matter, of course, but if someone asks for the price early and they go, I don't know, that seems high, maybe they don't really have that big of a need to solve.
Exactly. It's again that same shift from value to risk. So first buyer asks themselves, why would I care? Why would I want this? And then they start to think about, why may I not want this? Okay, and that's, if you don't see that shift, that's a red flag.
We did have one other question on sentiment. The question was, can you give an example of what might be considered a sentiment? Whether it's a word, a voice, a tone, that kind of thing.
It's a combination of both words and tone. In our at least the calls that we analyze are most of them are B2B sales, so the words themselves are much more significant in tone. People can say some very difficult things in very quiet voice. So the words are the one of the most important. But it could be anywhere from, well, my issue with that said I don't see how it's going to work. Okay, that's a negative sentiment. Okay, maybe not a 2, okay, or a minus, but that could be a -1. Okay, -2 is extreme. I mean, that'll be like, yeah, these, I don't see the value in these, and this, doesn't ring true to me. And enthusiastic, that's an easier one. Yeah, this is great. Definitely we need something like that. Okay, that's a positive sentiment.
Yep. Good. That's helpful. And then another question came in kind of on this current slide. As you were looking at these won and lost deals here, did you where pricing is discussed early or discussed later in the call, was there a particular market or customer segment, meaning small or SMB, mid-market, or enterprise, or was it across all segments?
Okay, so most of our calls, I'd say almost 100% are B2B. Most of the customers are in the technology industry, either software as a service, software, or hardware. Yep. And most sales team are 10 to several hundreds of salespeople.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the size. In terms of the buyers, so our customers, I mean, they run the gamut from very small businesses like restaurants to very large corporations.
Okay, good. So kind of a cross section. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we gave 5 cues that something is off with the deal. Here's actually a surprising one, actually a good sign for the deal. Let's end on a higher note, just not always wrong. So let's get a positive one.
We all want to hear this.
Surprised me. It's a word that most people would kind of think is a negative, but turns out the data shows that it's not. It's actually pretty positive. Okay, and that word is probably. Okay. So, and the context is, a lot of people qualify deals on their timing, right? So, when would you like to have this ready, or what's your timeline for doing that? And there's the responses here could vary from anywhere. We need this yesterday, okay, which actually is not a great answer.
Wow.
Remember, like the overly positive, the overly enthusiastic buyer.
Yeah.
This yesterday isn't really serious. Or we're going to do it sometime next year, which obviously is, there's no concrete timeline or is it? But when someone says, probably in November, okay, in addition with timing, it doesn't mean that the deal was closed, but if the deal will close, the timing is probably pretty accurate. Okay? So if someone is kind of like qualifying the response, probably in November, and again, that's interpretation, not necessarily the data, but the data shows that it's very likely to close on time if it does.
Good.
Okay, and it's probably, my interpretation, for what it's worth, is probably a more thoughtful answer. If someone gave it some thought and took the time to understand their timing, and that's why they're being a little more cautious about it.
Well, I guess you just gave the sales profession a new qualification stage here. I mean, it's called the probably stage for timing. That's pretty pretty cool. Once again, if you have any comments, maybe listeners on the call, on the webinar here, maybe you've heard some words that you think indicate something. We'd love for you to share those as well. Just jump on the chat or the Q&A, or if you have any questions, we're leaving the chat and the Q&A open as well.
Yeah, by all means, that'll be great. I'd love to hear some words from the audience. If there's anything you'd like us to run, I mean, I'm happy to put it in a queue and at some point maybe test words and phrases for validity and see what we can learn from that.
Amit, is there any? I know you do tons of research. I was very excited to hear your research about the listening to talk ratio. I know we're not going to bring that up today, but that was fascinating to me. How the percentage or the chances that a deal will close go way up when the talk ratio of a rep goes way down. But is there anything else that you'd like to share? Maybe some future research you're doing, or any other research similar to what you shared today that you'd like to mention at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton. I mean, we can't share all of these today, but if you go to our blog, you can actually find there are several dozens of research articles. It's gong.io/blog. Today, for example, we just posted on a post on optimal demo structure, demos that convert more deals. Last week, you had a great one about 13 words you want to avoid on your sales conversation that are statistically proven to reduce your likelihood of closing the deals. And there's more coming up. So you could either look at previous research, you can sign up, and by all means, if you have questions, something that you want us to try to research, we're more than happy. A lot of our research comes from ideas that we get from the audience. So, we're always happy to look into suggestions and requests from the crowd.
And here's a couple questions that have come in as you were talking. Question one, do any of the trigger words change when it is a renegotiation with an active client? And I'm assuming that means you have the business and maybe you're going for a contract renewal and you're renegotiating that. Basically, how do you know if someone may be looking, good question. Basically, how do you know someone may be looking at leaving you? And maybe even going with a competitor after, let's say, they've been with you for a year or two. Do you have any information on that at all?
Well, we don't have any published research. It is a very good question, and again, everything needs to be researched with their own types of calls. So what's true in general is not necessarily true for certain types of calls. But yeah, we had actually one of our customers ask us to identify parameters that can flag a customer is about to abandon or is a jeopardy. Sentiment of the conversation, duration of the conversation is shorter than planned, and a few other keywords that might indicate that customer is at risk. So it is possible. We haven't done something that is that analyzes across the board what are the signals that a customer is considering leaving you, but that's a great suggestion.
That is a great one. A lot of renewal reps out there, right?
Yeah.
Good. Well, we look forward to hearing that one. And then the second question that came in, well, this is really a comment, and maybe you've done some research around this. And the comment is the sales process certainly doesn't end after the initial signing. In fact, you could make an argument that the sales process is just at the beginning, because you got to implement, you have to service, you have to, renew at some point or upgrade, what have you. Any thoughts on that one?
First, I totally agree, and that's what I emphasize even to our team. The initial deal is actually easier. Actually, growing the customer and maintaining and running a lifelong relationship is really the biggest challenge, and this is where the sales starts. And a lot of the things that we have shared here apply. The words probably in some of the visual cues, but definitely it's a great area to focus more research on, just retention and expansion and maintaining great relationship with the lifetime customers.
And another comment, this is good. We got some very good activity out there by the viewers. Please keep your comments and questions coming. We're actually we have plenty of time left. We won't necessarily use it all if we don't need it, but keep them coming. And this looks like someone that was very pleased with today's webinar. They said, this is fantastic information from an analytics software company. Thank you for that comment.
Thrilled to hear. That's great to hear. Thank you.
Again, we'll keep this open and just take a few more minutes here. If we don't keep getting comments or questions, we'll wind down here in a few minutes. Nothing wrong with ending a meeting shorter than the expected time. I'm sure they'll give you a little time back in the day to maybe go out and practice some of these words. Maybe just a sneak preview there. I'd like to maybe put you on the spot, Amit, there a little bit. You mentioned words sales reps use that they should avoid. Do you have, off the top of your head, are you able to share maybe one word that sales reps tend to use, or a phrase they tend to use that maybe isn't the best thing to use that you'd like to share?
Okay, here's one that actually isn't real, but you shouldn't be using, like, great question, especially when it's repeated like 10 times on a call.
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, kind of a little bit of a cliche. You hear it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And you're saying that's just not necessary or doesn't advance the conversation much?
It doesn't advance, and when it's repeated, I mean, if you say it once or twice, it's harmless. It's not helpful, but it's harmless. But if that's like a pattern that you're saying like all the time, that actually decreases your likelihood of conversion. It just doesn't sound sincere.
I know one of the phrases, and I'll bear my my innermost comments here, but one of the phrases I've found myself using when I want to validate or I want to check in that a point I made resonated, I tend to use the phrase, does that make sense? And now that we're having this webinar, I'm wondering, that may not be the best thing to use. But do you have any thoughts on that phrase at all?
Yeah, I think that's one on our list. And what you really want to ask is not, does that make sense? Because you'll get a yes or no question. Okay, what you probably want to ask, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, is what do you think? All right, that's an open-ended question, and then you get the prospect to reflect on what you've just said and to respond. How does that work for you?
What are your thoughts on that? So very good. Always try to phrase open-ended. There's certainly times to use closed-ended. Really, but that's great. Good tip. Good tip. Yes, the recording will be available, by the way. We just had a question come in. We post this plus send it out to all registrants just shortly after, I think within a day or two. So look for that.
Excellent.
Just a minute more here. We'll leave the lines open, the Q&A and the chat. Either one of those works. Amit, while we just got a minute here while we'll wait for any other questions before we sign off. Tell me a little bit about Gong. What are you folks focused on now? Do you have any big plans for the future? I know you're getting ramped up. Anything you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, so definitely big plans. I mean, we just raised a large funding round, raised $20 million. We're expanding the R&D, customer support. A lot of our focus has been on the initial customer acquisition, and we're investing heavily now in expanding to customer support and account management and the renewals of some of the folks here have mentioned. That's a big plan for us. Plus, I can't talk about product specific, but we have some pretty big plans on expanding the footprint of the product and applying to more and more use cases beyond just the initial calls.
Well, we're very excited. You're right in the middle of a growing community, inside sales, digital sales, whatever you call it. Heck, there's some companies that still call it telesales, believe it or not, which is fine by me because we're all in this work profession together. We're virtually selling. We're growing. The technology is advancing. We're still a very people-centered profession, but some of the things you're doing are going to be game changers. you know, I got to ask you a question here, completely off topic, but it's something that I've been spending some time researching myself. Artificial intelligence. Do you have any comments about AI and anything that you see coming down the pike?
Yeah, I think it's not coming. It's here now, and most people just don't grasp two things. First, the magnitude of change, and second, how quickly it'll come. It's a lot faster than what most people can grasp. But AI is now helping salespeople drive performance, but in a short amount of time, it'll start automating a lot of the things that people are doing that people don't like doing, and at some point, we'll start taking more and more of the tasks and the activities that the salespeople are actually doing live. I mean, there's no question. I mean, that's pretty obvious to me.
You know, when I get up in front of, when we go to conferences and I open up the conference in Boston, I said, AI is here. In fact, I get asked all the time, will sales bots replace salespeople? And I say, absolutely, they will. It's going to happen. But fear not. Just like the computer came on, everybody thought, oh, my job is going to be replaced by a computer. What happened? Millions and millions of jobs were created because of the computer. And I believe the same thing. Because of AI, we're going to continue to grow. There's no slowing down in the growth of the sales profession, specifically the virtual sales profession. The lines between face-to-face and inside are blurred. We use video today like we're using here on the webinar. So anyway, this is a great comment that just came in. And I think it's an appropriate way to end on kind of a high note from our audience, because we know the thought expertise really lies within the viewers out there. And the comment is, here's another way to pause during a demo or presentation to see if, instead of saying, does that make sense? This is a good one. We'll leave in a high note. And the viewer said, let me pause here for a minute and get your thoughts or questions you might have on what I just talked about. They got to answer something to that. It's a great open-ended phrase. With that, I think we can probably click to the last slide or two, and we're going to wish everyone a good week. I want to thank Gong and Amit for sharing some excellent research, and we hope you put those words to use. Amit, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Bob, and thanks everyone for the company. I enjoyed the conversation.
All right, everyone. Until next webinar, everyone, good selling. Hope these tips help. Have a good week. Bye-bye.